My tiny house needs some kitchen cupboards, and so I'm going to show you how I make these cupboards, and from start to finish I'll give you the whole routine. Now this cupboard is going to go right up here, so it's going to be a long narrow cupboard. So we'll fly back to my house, and there's my shop right there in that barn, and so we'll get started. So we're going to make this out of cherry because that's what the base cabinet is made out of. It'll be 32 inches high and 10 inches wide and 8 inches deep. So that's the plan. I always draw things up so that I can remember what I'm doing as I'm going along. So today we'll build this cupboard. Now several years ago we cut down a cherry tree here on my property, and I've been drying this lumber upstairs in my barn. We got it stickered up and it's dry enough to work with now, and so the first thing we'll do is plane up a bunch of this cherry down to 3/4 inch, and we'll put a nice edge on the joiner here on all the boards so that we have a nice straight edge as we rip these boards. It's real important to have coffee available and from time to time to take a little break. Now we'll make our cupboard out of plywood. Several years ago I learned that you want to make your cupboards out of plywood because it's a nice stable piece of lumber to work with. It's not going to warp or twist and so on. So I'll cut the shelves and the sides and so on. I always make a little arrow mark right there, and then I'll set my blade right down on that point. That way I can get a real accurate cut to just the dimension that I want. So there's a little tip for you. So we're going to cut these shelves, and next thing we have to do is cut these dados. It's just a little slot halfway through that plywood for those shelves to sit down in. So there's my line where I'm going to cut the dado, and it'll be on that side of the line. So I have to measure over from the bit to the edge of the router, see what that distance is for the straight edge. So I've got my two sides lined right up here, and the shelf is up 12 inches, and so I'll measure up 12 inches and draw a line across there. So I've got the two side pieces right up next to each other there, and draw the line for the first shelf, and then here's the second shelf right there. Alright, now this straight edge is really slick. You get it right where you want it, and then with my right hand there I push that down and it locks it right in place. So now I can take the router and just run right along that straight edge, and it'll cut a nice straight dado across both side pieces. So when you go to put your shelf in, you'll know that it's at the same height on both sides, you know. So here I am cutting the next shelf. Just slow and steady across there. Now I put that straight edge down at the end there, just the right distance so I can cut a dado across the end. Alright, so the next thing that I do is I run this old plywood through my sander here, and it kind of cleans it up and so on. Now this is some plywood that I found in the junk somewhere. My wife used to call me a garbage picker. I go around on junk day, and somebody had a piece of plywood 2 feet wide and 8 feet long, and I threw it in my truck and brought it home. I can't throw anything out, so I know eventually I'll use it for something. So here we go. We're putting those shelves down in the dados just to get a dry fit here and make sure it's gonna go together okay. Now what I'm doing now is I'm drawing lines right in the center point of each one of those dados. And then I take a drill with a real small drill bit and drill down through on those lines. And that way, when I go to nail, I'm assured that the nails are going to come through right in the center of the dado. I learned that little trick several years ago, because you go to nail into this thin plywood. It's only 5/8 plywood, and you're liable to be off a little bit, and then the nail will come out sideways through the shelf and so on. So I'll stick some glue in there next, and then install the shelves in there. And we've got to get things all lined up nice and even on the sides there. There we go. Then I'll take the other side and slide it on there. So here we go. We've got the other side there. Now I have the holes already drilled. I set the nails in there, and when I pound them down in, they're going to go straight right into that shelf. So there's no way I can miss and mess things up. All right, so now on the back side, we're going to put a piece of plywood on here, and I didn't have a piece wide enough, quite wide enough. And so, but that's all right, because I've ripped it on the table saw, and I've got nice straight edges. And I'll just cut a little piece here. I think it was 1 1/8, and we'll glue it on there. And you'll never know. I mean, lots of times this plywood is glued together like that anyway. And so I'll put a couple clamps on there, and that way that'll squeeze that right together. Then I'll nail it down, and we're good to go. There's the back of the cabinet. Now you're not going to see this cabinet, you'll just see inside the cabinet. And so plywood is fine. What you want to do is make a nice front for your cabinet. So right here, I'm making the face frame, and this is cherry. So I cut these little side stiles here. And once again, I drill down through so that I know that my nail is going to go right in the center of the plywood as I nail it in. This cherry is hard and it's brittle, and it's real hard to drive a nail through it to begin with. And so if you pre-drill, then you set your nails in there, they'll drive right in straight and nice and right in the center of the plywood. Then I take a nail set and set them down in a little bit, because before we finish this whole piece, we'll plug those holes. All right, now we're going to cut the side, the shelf pieces here, and I cut them a little bit long, and then I go back to the saw and I trim off just a hair at a time until I get that just perfect, so that when I slide it in there, it fits nice and tight. So there we go. There's the next shelf up. And you can see how tight it is. But that's my little trick that I learned years ago. I cut those a little bit long, and then just keep going back to the saw, trimming off a hair at a time until I get it just perfect. So there we go. There's our box. There's the actual cupboard. Now we're going to make the raised panel door. Now on your raised panel door, you have your stiles, which are the parts that run up and down, and the rails are the ones that run crossways. So I've got this set of cutters that will do this job. And first we're going to do the stiles, which are these big long side pieces. And so I've got everything set up here, and we're going to router that profile into those stiles. And that's what that looks like. Cuts that little slot in there, and that's where your panel is going to slide into. So now we've got to measure to see what the overall width of the door will be, Turns out 9 inches will work just fine. So I lay my stiles down. I get them 9 inches apart. Alright, now I gotta figure, alright, 5.5 is what those rails will need to be. So okay, we measure out our 5.5 inches, and I make that little arrowhead again so I can cut that really precisely by setting that blade down on the tip of that arrowhead. And next thing we'll do is we're going to cut the profile in the end of those rails on both ends so that that whole thing will slide together. Sometimes kind of hard to explain, but you'll see what I mean. So next we have to take off our stile cutters, and this is a stacked set here. There's three cutters to cut the profile and the stile, and so we'll take those out of there, put them back in the box, and now we'll get out the rail cutters. Now the rails have this profile here, and that'll cut that little profile right there in the end of that rail. Now to make this work, you put a spacer in between, and then we got to cut that little dado out of there, and that's what that cutter will do. So that's the order that you install the cutters on the spindle. Now I have this sled that I use to slide those little short rails through that cutter, so you don't have to hold them by hand, and this works real good. You slide your rail in there and up against the fence, and then adjust it so it's tight there, and then pop these 3 clamps down. Good safe way to shove them through. Now this is my little setup rail that I've saved. I've got the profile cut in the end of it, and I'll need to raise up that spindle right there so that those cutters match up with this profile in the end of this block that I've stuck in there. So I'm raising it up. So I'm raising it up. There we go. See, I can slide that right through, so I know that I'm at the right height. Now I'll take my cherry pieces and slide them into the sled here, and it's got these little adjustments you make. Then you flip these down. That holds it nice and secure. And oh yeah, the piece goes in face down. Here's another look at it. Slide that over, and bing, bing, bing. That's all there is to it. It's really quick. Now you've got a safe handle to hold on to and run these little narrow pieces through that big cutter. So that's the whole reason for using this sled, and it really works slick. I always make my adjustment and then check it with some scrap pieces of pine to make sure that I've got everything just right so these pieces will slide together. And here we go. That's how it fits together right there. And it'll be a nice tight fit. Alright, now we're going to cut the profile in the panel. It's going to go in the center of these rails and stiles. And this is a great big cutter. And I use the power feed to run lengthways, and then when I go on the ends here, I have to go really slow because we're cutting cross grain there, and so I run those through by hand. So there's the panel that's going to slide into those rails and stiles. So we got the top rail here, and we'll shove that into that slot, and that panel is cut just the right thickness so that it'll slide into that slot, and that panel in the center there will float. It's not glued in, it just floats in that slot. So there we go. I'm sliding the rail into those 2 stiles there, and then into the panel in the center. Now we get everything lined up here and nice and even. Now you'll be able to see how that panel floats in there. So your raised panel door is made up of 2 stiles and a rail at the bottom and at the top. And then this center panel, it slides into a slot in the stiles and the rail. Alright, now we're going to remove this panel cutter, which is a great big cutter there, you can see. And I had to take the center out in order to get that big cutter in there. So now we'll put these plates back in there. And I've got a little round over bit here that I'm going to use to round the edges on the door. So here we go. I've got the front of the cupboard facing down, and I'm running it right through that cutter, and it puts a round edge on the door, so you don't have that real sharp edge on your door. Now I've got to run through across that end piece again. So I've got to go slow to give that cutter a chance to cut without burning or throwing the piece around. Alright, now we'll put the hinges on. We're almost done here. So there's our little cupboard, and I see my video is getting a little bit long here, so the only thing I've got left to do is put that knob on there and then do the finishing on the cupboard. But there we go. It'll be going up to that tiny house here pretty soon. Thanks for watching, everybody.